What if humans could breathe underwater? In today's world, humans rely on air to breathe, but what if that changed? What if one day all humans woke up and suddenly had gills like a fish? That would be pretty cool, right? You could just take a dip in the ocean and breathe as easily as you do on land. Well, it turns out that breathing underwater is actually more complicated than that. For starters, our lungs are adapted to extract oxygen from the air, not water. They do and have the necessary structures to get rid of carbon dioxide and other waste gases that are dissolved in water. So if we were to try breathing underwater with our lungs, we'd probably suffocate pretty quickly. To breathe underwater, we would need to evolve gills. Gills are organs that allow fish to extract dissolved oxygen from water. They work by passing water over specialized cells that absorb oxygen and release carbon dioxide. These cells contain hemoglobin, which is the same substance that carries oxygen in our blood. But unlike our lungs, gills are much more efficient at extracting oxygen from water. But simply growing gills wouldn't be enough. To breathe underwater, our entire respiratory system would have to be redesigned. Our throats would have to be modified to force water through our gills, and our bodies would need to pump water over those gills at high pressure. If humans could breathe underwater, it would change our lives in big ways. Cities would likely be built underwater, and scuba gear and boats would become useless. People would likely migrate to coastal areas or underwater habitats. And new industries would develop around underwater construction and maintenance. But it wouldn't be all sunshine and rainbows. Humans could potentially overpopulate the oceans and cause massive ecosystem damage. We could also wage war in the deep sea, plundering the resources of underwater habitats. If humans could breathe underwater, it would be a whole new world. New sports would develop, such as underwater basketball or soccer. Transportation would be revolutionized with underwater highways and public transit. And architecture would be transformed with buildings designed for both land and sea dwellers. Of course, there are also the risks. Underwater warfare could be devastating, and the oceans could be polluted by human waste and noise. But hey, it's just a fun movie. In reality, it's highly unlikely that humans will ever be able to breathe underwater. The evolutionary changes required would be too great, and the environmental impact would be too catastrophic. But a guy can dream, can't he? Make sure to subscribe if you are enjoying this video so far. Humans spend a lot of time near water, but we can't actually breathe underwater. We're pretty terrible at it, actually, so what if we could breathe underwater? What if evolution took a turn and every person on the planet suddenly sprouted gills that allowed them to live like fish? The world would be pretty different. But how would our bodies change? What about our lifestyle? And could we mess up the entire ocean ecosystem? Let's dive in. Hey there, welcome to Life Noggin. Now the ocean covers more than 70% of Earth's surface and makes up 97% of all water on our planet. In fact, if you were to spread it out into a pancake, it would stretch out to cover all the continents twice. The sheer volume of water in our oceans is just staggering, containing over 96,000 trillion gallons of water. However, we humans don't take full advantage of this giant pool because we cannot breathe underwater. Our lungs are simply not equipped to pull oxygen from water like gills are. Unlike the oxygen in the air we breathe, which is around 21%, the amount of dissolved oxygen in water varies depending on conditions such as temperature and salinity. But on average, there's only about 1 part of oxygen per 10,000 parts of seawater. As an added bonus, water also doesn't conduct sound very well, meaning that we couldn't hear each other in the water. Even with the best hearing, the sounds produced by our bodies are about 100 times weaker in water than they are in air. Luckily for us though, water is still 1,000 times denser than air, so it would help protect us from external dangers while we're underwater. But let's say that we did evolve gills. How would they work? First, we need to get rid of our lungs. While both organs extract oxygen from their surroundings, lungs work with air, not water. They're good for getting oxygen from the air we breathe onto our blood. which then transports it throughout our body. But this process wouldn't work underwater. We'd need to release the oxygen in our blood into the surrounding water instead of inhaling oxygen from the air. Gills, on the other hand, are made up of thin filaments which provide a large surface area for extracting oxygen from water. These filaments are surrounded by blood vessels and operate via diffusion. Oxygen passes from the water through the gill membranes and into the blood, while carbon dioxide passes the other way, leaving the bloodstream and diffusing into the water. But gills aren't always efficient. Some fish species, like lungfish, actually do have both gills and lungs. So maybe we could grow something similar. That way we could breathe underwater when we were young and then use our lungs once we got a little older. Or maybe we could grow internal gills. With these, blood vessels would run along plates of tissue that would allow us to absorb oxygen directly from the water around us. But before we start building our own personal aquariums, we need to make some major adjustments to our body structure. One of the biggest changes we need to make is to alter our skin. Skin tissue comes in a variety of textures, but in general, it's pretty thick. Not only would this make it harder for oxygen to pass through, but it would also prevent the formation of gills. Humans without gills would definitely drown if we tried to submerge ourselves to deep. But what if we evolved to have thinner skin? Well, maybe it would come with some unwanted side effects. Thinner skin would lead to more fragile skin, which means that cuts and scratches would bleed more and heal slower. In addition, we might be more sensitive to things like temperature or UV rays. Not to mention that if we developed gills while we were still living on land, we would probably die from bacterial infections. The salt content of seawater is much higher than the salt content of our bodies, which would lead to us losing more water than usual through osmosis. If we wanted to survive, we'd either need to increase our salt intake or decrease our water intake. Wait a second, decreasing our water intake seems like it would dehydrate us. Well, yes, it would. But in order for us to evolve gills, we need to be fully submerged in water at the least part of the time. Maybe we could hold our breath underwater, but eventually we'd need to learn how to breathe underwater. But why wait? You can learn about real aquatic animals right now. Now, if we were going to spend most of our lives underwater, we'd want to be able to move as easily as possible. And while we've gotten pretty good at swimming over the years, our current swimsuit technology isn't quite ready for prime time. If we had gills, we'd probably need to wear some sort of protective clothing while we're not in water, like full body suits that would keep us hydrated and safe from the elements. But if we were going to be constantly covered up, we wouldn't exactly be able to enjoy life on land. No more picnics in the park or sunbathing on the beach. And if everyone on Earth had gills, where would people go to dry off? Everyone would probably head to the nearest beach, which would quickly become overcrowded. We either need to build giant drying domes or relocate inland, which begs the question, would cities even exist anymore? Sure, some people would probably prefer to stay underwater, especially since coral reefs are beautiful and there would be a lot less noise pollution. But if we were to leave the coasts, where would we go? Many of the buildings we use today aren't built to last thousands of years, so they wouldn't stand up against the constant erosion caused by water. Even the strongest concrete erodes approximately 1 inch every decade when fully submerged in seawater. Most of our homes wouldn't stand a chance. In fact, many of the structures we use today are dependent upon the air we breathe. How would submarines function if everyone on Earth had gills? How would scuba gear work? For that matter, boats would become useless too, unless they were designed with gills in mind. At that point, we might as well build new modes of transportation optimized for underwater use, like vehicles that would allow us to travel at superhuman speeds through the ocean. I'm picturing some kind of sleek, fast-moving submarine that could zip us through the water at the push of a button. No more traffic jams, no more road rage, just slip on your oxygen mask, climb into your personal water pod and zoom to work. Wait, you don't have a personal water pod. Maybe you should check your 6-figure income. Anyway, we'd probably need to rethink our agricultural systems as well. There are plenty of farms underwater today, but they tend to focus on seaweed or kelp rather than things like rice. Plus, how would farmers harvest crops without coming up for air? Maybe we could develop some sort of underwater farm vehicle that would allow us to harvest crops without ever coming to the surface. Or maybe we could grow crops in massive underwater domes that would allow us to continue farming as we do today. If we could do that, we might even be able to export food to other planets. Speaking of exporting, how would trade work if everyone had gills? Trade routes would definitely be disrupted. We could no longer rely on cargo ships to transport goods across the world. Instead, we'd need to find alternative methods of moving items underwater, whether that be through underwater drones, autonomous vehicles, or some other method. But this does raise another question. Would we be able to continue exploring outer space? Currently, astronauts must undergo rigorous training to prepare for long periods spent in low-oxygen environments outside of Earth's atmosphere. But if we could breathe underwater, maybe we could train astronauts to breathe underwater instead. It might actually be easier to explore the bottom of the Mariana Trench than the surface of Mars. Of course, it would be hard to stop there. We might even send gill-equipped soldiers to war on the ocean floor. Countries would battle it out in sunken submarines or giant underwater mechs. The possibilities are really endless. The truth is, it would take millions of years for humans to evolve gills. Luckily, scientists are already developing artificial gills. While they're currently used in medical settings, researchers hope to one day miniaturize them and attach them to scuba gear. This would allow divers to stay underwater indefinitely, which is exciting. But here's why I'm glad we don't have gills yet. By miniaturizing the size of fish gills, scientists estimate that we would only be able to make them around 10 times more efficient than our current lungs. However, humans produce about 150 million tons of CO2 each year, which means that if we had gills, we'd essentially be dumping all that CO2 into the ocean. Plus, we'd be competing for resources with sea life. An estimated 80% of the ocean's surface is inhabited by some form of life. And if we're constantly harvesting oxygen from the ocean, that could disrupt the balance of life in the sea. In fact, the amount of oxygen we'd consume might deplete the ocean's supply. In addition, we humans are known for polluting everything we touch, including our own bodies. If we had gills, we could introduce microplastics and other pollutants into the ocean through our own waste and consumption of fish. I think it's safe to say that we aren't quite ready for gills just yet. But hey, that doesn't mean we can't dream about what it would be like to breathe underwater. So if you have enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe and visit this video. As always, this has been Life Noggin. Don't forget to keep on thinking.